One of Germany's top generals was once a key supporter of Hitler until he became his greatest enemy. This is the story of General Ludwig Beck, a military mastermind who risked everything to stop the Nazi regime. Today, we uncover his transformation, his resistance, and the sacrifice that sealed his fate. Ludwig Beck's journey from a skilled military officer to Hitler's unexpected adversary began long before the Nazi regime's rise. Born in 1880, Beck entered the German army in 1898, quickly distinguishing himself while serving as a staff officer on the Western Front during the First World War. In the years between the wars, Beck shaped German military doctrine as a key architect of the Reichswehr, the Weimar Republic's armed forces, limited by the Treaty of Versailles. Beck's most significant contribution was the Truppenführung Manual in 1933, which became the cornerstone of German tactical doctrine. It emphasized flexibility, initiative, and mission-based tactics, later forming the basis of blitzkrieg strategy. The manual's influence extended beyond Germany, shaping military thinking across Europe and the United States. As chief of the German General Staff from 1935 to 1938, Beck strongly supported German military rearmament, believing it was necessary to restore the country's strength. However, he soon grew wary of Hitler's ambitions, recognizing that military expansion was being used for reckless aggression rather than defense. Early Nazi rule saw Beck optimistic about the regime strengthening Germany. He believed an authoritarian government could provide stability to overcome challenges. However, as Hitler's intentions became clear, Beck's optimism waned. His growing concerns about the aggressive foreign policy marked his transformation from supporter to critic. Beck, valuing military professionalism and international law, found himself at odds with Hitler's expansionism. The 1938 Sudeten crisis was a turning point. Beck watched in horror as Hitler ignored diplomatic warnings and drove Germany toward war. He repeatedly warned that Germany was unprepared, both militarily and economically. But Hitler's response was clear: war was inevitable. For Beck, this was no longer about strategy, it was about preventing catastrophe. As chief of staff, Beck had unique insights into Hitler's plans. Witnessing the Führer's disregard for military advice and diplomatic norms, he began to see Hitler as a reckless fanatic threatening Europe with conflict. As his doubts mounted, he became increasingly isolated within the military hierarchy. Many colleagues, out of fear, ambition, or belief in the Nazi cause, followed Hitler's directives unquestioningly. As Beck's doubts about Hitler's leadership grew, a crucial moment approached that would test his loyalty to Germany against his conscience. In May 1938, Beck penned a memorandum that marked the beginning of his open defiance. This document contained dire warnings about Hitler's aggressive plans and reflected Beck's realization about the true nature of Hitler's ambitions. The memorandum focused on Hitler's intentions to invade Czechoslovakia, a move Beck severely opposed. He argued that such an action would be disastrous for Germany, citing the strength of potential adversaries. Beck asserted that the French army was the strongest fighting force in Europe and that Britain would likely intervene on France's side if Germany attacked. Beck's concerns extended beyond military strategy. He believed that Germany's overall situation was precarious, particularly in terms of its economy and ability to sustain a prolonged conflict. As Hitler continued to push for war, Beck's opposition intensified. He began to mobilize other generals against Hitler's plans, and in June 1938 took an even bolder step. He urged senior officers to consider a mass collective resignation as a means to force Hitler to abandon his plans for war. He declared, "If a soldier in a position of highest authority in such times sees his duties and tasks only within the limits of his military responsibilities, without consciousness of his higher responsibility to the whole people, then he shows a lack of greatness, a lack of comprehension of responsibility. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary actions." With these words, Beck transcended his role as a military officer, embracing a moral obligation to his country. Beck's actions during this period highlighted the challenges of maintaining military professionalism under Nazi rule. As chief of the General Staff, he was expected to support and implement Hitler's decisions. However, his growing awareness of the regime's true nature placed him in an increasingly untenable position. Beck found himself caught between his duty as a soldier and his moral convictions as a German patriot. As Beck's opposition became more apparent, his position within the military hierarchy grew increasingly precarious. His efforts to influence Hitler's decisions from within the system were failing, and he found himself more isolated with each passing day. The tension between Beck's strategic vision and Hitler's aggressive plans reached a breaking point. In August 1938, Beck suggested to Walter von Brauchitsch, the commander-in-chief of the German army, that a house cleaning within the Nazi regime was needed to reduce the SS's influence while keeping Hitler as dictator. At an August 10th summit with leading generals, Hitler rejected Beck's objections to the plans for the invasion of Czechoslovakia. and persuaded most of his generals to support him. Beck alone resigned on August 18th. General Franz Halder succeeded him as head of the general staff. At Hitler's request, Beck kept his resignation secret. Although Hitler promised him a major field command for his discretion, Beck was disillusioned when he was instead placed on the retired list. With his military career over, Beck had a choice: fade into obscurity or fight back. He chose resistance. From his Berlin home, he built an underground network of officers and politicians determined to overthrow Hitler. His contacts reached deep into the Wehrmacht, where growing dissatisfaction provided an opportunity to act. Beck's home in Berlin transformed into a clandestine headquarters for a small circle of opposition. This group included both active and retired military officers, as well as conservative civilians who shared Beck's concerns about Hitler's leadership. Among these conspirators was Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for what would become one of the most daring plots in history. The transition from military leader to resistance organizer was not without its challenges. Beck and his co-conspirators operated in an environment of extreme danger, where discovery meant certain death. The Gestapo's reach was long, and trust was a rare commodity. Despite these risks, Beck's reputation and connections allowed him to build a network that spanned military and civilian circles. As the resistance group grew, Beck recognized the need for international support. He turned his attention to diplomatic channels, hoping to leverage foreign influence against Hitler's aggressive policies. Beck's group made contact with the British Foreign Office, informing them of their plans and seeking assurances. They believed that a firm warning from Britain might deter Hitler from his planned invasion of Czechoslovakia. In a bold move, Beck's group also sought assistance from the Vatican, dispatching Josef Müller on a secret mission to Rome to enlist Pope Pius XII as a mediator with the Western Allies. This initiative demonstrated the desperation of the resistance and their willingness to explore every possible avenue to prevent the looming catastrophe. As Hitler's actions became increasingly aggressive, Beck's views on the necessity of removing the Führer from power evolved. The resistance group began to contemplate direct action against Hitler himself. However, they harbored some naive hopes about the aftermath of their planned coup, believing they could negotiate a peace settlement with Britain and France that would allow Germany to retain some territorial gains. As the war progressed, Beck emerged as a key figure in what would become known as the July 20th plot. The plotters designated him to become the acting head of state in the provisional government that would take power after Hitler's assassination. This role reflected the high esteem in which Beck was held by his fellow plotters, as well as their belief in the need for a figure of authority to stabilize the country in the aftermath of the coup. On July 20, 1944, a single briefcase held the fate of Nazi Germany. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a key resistance figure, carried this ordinary-looking item into a military conference at Hitler's Wolf Lair in East Prussia. Inside lay an explosive device, primed to end Hitler's reign of terror. Tension gripped the resistance leaders. Years of planning had led to this moment. While Beck was not directly involved in planning and executing the assassination, he was chosen as head of state for the provisional government that would replace Hitler's rule. He waited anxiously in Berlin, prepared to take control the moment confirmation of Hitler's death arrived. Stauffenberg placed the briefcase beneath the table where Hitler sat. He positioned it carefully, aiming for maximum impact. With the bomb set, he exited, citing an urgent phone call. The conspirators waited, hearts pounding, for news of the explosion. The blast shook the Wolf's Lair. Confusion reigned. Reports conflicted. Was Hitler dead or alive? In Berlin, Beck and his fellow plotters faced a critical decision. Should they proceed with the coup or wait for confirmation? Beck chose action. He believed hesitation would only give Hitler's loyalists time to regroup. The resistance began implementing their plans, issuing orders to arrest key Nazi officials and seize vital communications centers. Hours passed, chaos intensified. Conflicting information poured in. Something had gone terribly wrong. The truth, when it emerged, devastated the plotters. Hitler had survived, with minor injuries. A last-minute adjustment by another officer had pushed the briefcase behind a heavy table leg, shielding the Führer from the full force of the explosion. As news of Hitler's survival spread, the coup attempt unraveled. Loyal Nazi forces reasserted control. The plotters found themselves isolated and vulnerable. At the army's headquarters on Bentleystrasse in Berlin, the atmosphere turned grim. Troops loyal to Hitler surrounded the building. For Beck, who had risked everything to save Germany from Hitler's madness, the moment of reckoning arrived. Knowing that capture meant torture and execution, Beck attempted to take his own life, but this attempt resulted only in severe injury. Unable to complete the act himself, Beck's life ended at the hands of a sergeant who carried out the execution with a shot to the neck. Ludwig Beck's story is a reminder that even those in positions of power face moral crossroads. Though his resistance ended in tragedy, his defiance proved that not all in Nazi Germany followed Hitler blindly. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. We hope you found this video informative. If you want to learn more about the fates of other German commanders, check out our video on Johannes Blaskowitz, the general who stood against the SS. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more World War II stories, and we'll see you in the next one.